you have the time to listen to me whine about nothing and everything all at once? I am one of those.
Hi, I'm anarchist prisoner Sean Swain, and this is the 4th episode. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get started on today's topic, did you know that the World Health Organization says that gaming addiction is a real thing? Yeah, I think I'm a gaming addict. They put Candy Crush on our phone tablets, and I just have to admit here, Candy Crush is fucking my whole life up. I can't put the damn thing down. Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I'm experiencing. I just wanted to admit that. I don't think they have like Candy Crush 12-step meetings or anything yet. I don't know. So, yeah, I just figured I'd get that out of the way. So this week, episode 4, do you know, I think you know, do you know the period of our lives that we do the most learning? From birth to age 5. This is what the really smart people who study this stuff say. From birth to age 5, right? And then it relies on guys like Piaget. You've heard of Piaget, famous dead guy, and all these folks. And if you think about that, that really makes sense. Because from the time that we're born, it's kind of like a clean slate going on there, right? We don't really have a whole lot of content of what we know. And so you're learning a whole lot of stuff really fast. For instance, that you are separate from the rest of the world, that you end at your fingertips and your toes and the top of your head. Object permanence. This is a thing. Because, if you play peekaboo with a small child, with a baby, they're really amazed because you cover their eyes and then peekaboo, you're back. This is really magic to them because when they can't see you, they don't know you're there. So we learn object permanence, that a thing really sticks around even when we can't see it. And of course, we learn things like gravity. Sir Isaac Newton is famous for this, but we all learn gravity at the age of 2 when we take mashed potatoes and throw them on the kitchen floor. We're like, hey, note to self, everything goes down. So this is all of this is experiential learning, and it's driven by what makes us curious. Curiosity is the thing that drives our own progress as we learn. So we might emulate adults that are around us, a parent or a caregiver. We see how they walk and talk, and we imitate how they walk and talk. We're constantly absorbing stuff. A guy named Daniel Quinn, he's a writer. He says that from 0 to 5, we are learning machines. And we really are. We're like sponges. We're soaking up everything around us. And in the process, our brain is creating neural pathways. We're actually building our brains. It's a hardwiring process. As we're learning new stuff, our brains are actually changing shape. So in the first 5 years of our lives, we're doing so much learning that we actually change how the brain, the hardwiring of the brain, is actually occurring. If you were to picture this, in the first 5 years of our lives, our learning has this radical steep trajectory, right? Like Tom Cruise flying a fighter jet almost straight up. And then it all but flatlines at age 5. And so the question is, what is the trauma that we all universally experience at age 5 that causes our learning to flatline? Well, the answer, I would suggest, is school. School is just the opposite in every way to the experiential learning process of our early life. In our early life, we're driven by what makes us curious. Schools say, fuck that. We don't care what makes you curious. We're not here to discuss your curiosity. Stop raising your hand and asking why a fire engine is red. We're talking about George Washington crossing the Delaware, right? There's a curriculum, and that curriculum is devised by someone else who decided what the school is to teach. Now, to make a distinction here, teaching and learning are not the same thing. There can be a room where somebody's teaching and nobody's learning. And there can be another room where nobody's teaching and everybody's learning. So learning and teaching don't necessarily go together. And schools are all about teaching. They're not necessarily about learning. At age 5, our learning flatlines. Our curiosity gets killed. It gets smothered. So we sit in these regimented classrooms. There's no running around. Running around is what we did when we were exploring the world and successfully learning. Regimented classrooms with desks is how we sit when someone else is teaching and we're not learning. In schools, we have schedules for time participation, for time management, mandatory attendance. We are passive recipients of information that we may or may not care about. Schools are not a place for learning. They're a place for controlling what gets taught. And so there's been a lot of studies done on schools. Daniel Quinn talks about this. I keep referring back to that guy, but he's done a lot of writing about this. And so here's what we know. We retain 10% of what we learn in school. And that means we forget 90. For that 90%, we might remember it long enough to take a test, but not necessarily, depending on your test scores. If your test scores look like mine, you didn't even remember it long enough to take the test. But if you remembered it long enough to take the test, you still forget it before you graduate, because the information that's being given to you, on some level, you know it to be bullshit, and you forget about it. But you know the really amazing thing? We're all in consensus as to what 10% we need to retain and what 90% is bullshit. Uniformly, we all encounter the same information, and we say, oh, that's important. I better remember that. It's going to help me later in life. And then there's other information we all encounter, and we say, oh, that's bullshit. I don't care about that. That's not going to help me. So at the end of 13 years of school, we all agree, if we graduate, I did, I don't know how. At the end of 13 years of school, we all agree on what 10% of the information mattered. And we retain the exact same 10%. Typically, it's language, writing, how to talk, how to use grammar, because, you know, we look at that and we say, oh, that's going to help me later on in life because I'm going to need to be able to use that. Math, you know, basic math. I need to know how many gallons of gas I can get for this $20 bill. And then we also retain a smattering of science, history, and civics. And that's about it. At least in terms of the curriculum, that's about it. So if you think about this, since we only retain 10%, and we know that collectively, by consensus, that 90% of it is bullshit, we could actually, at least in practice, we could cut that 90% of bullshit out of the curriculum and leave the 10% we're going to learn anyway. And we could reduce the schooling to one full year, September through September, and then you graduate. And you still get the same amount of information that you otherwise would have got after going to school for an entire 13-year period. And we would save millions of dollars and decades of time. Now, here's the craziest part. The craziest part is we've known about this for decades and decades. We've known that we only retain 10% of what we're being taught. And still, we send kids to school for a 13-year period so they can forget 90% of what they're being taught, and teachers can teach stuff that no one's ever going to remember. And we spend millions of dollars and decades on this. Now, I suspect there's probably somebody listening to me right now, and you're thinking, wow, the schools are really fucked up. Somebody needs to fix them. No, no, they don't. The schools are actually working as designed. And that's the only conclusion we can draw. And this is kind of a topic that we're going to keep returning to in further episodes. So I might as well tackle this here, right? That when you look at something, a system that's set up, whatever it says it's there to do is kind of irrelevant. When you see that it's generating the same outcome day after day for weeks and months and years and decades, none of this is by accident. If you were an inspector at a toaster factory and you show up there and you plug in a toaster and you see that it pops up cold bread and you tell the factory manager his toasters don't work, if you come back a week from then and the toasters still don't work, and a month and a year and a decade, this isn't accidental. I don't know what his agenda is. You know, maybe this is a front for cocaine distribution or something. I don't know. But whatever it is he's doing with the toasters, those toasters aren't designed to work. There's some ulterior thing going on. And so that's the case with the schools. The schools aren't there to facilitate learning. It's not an empowerment program designed to create little geniuses coming off the assembly line. Fuck no. This really is a disempowerment program. It's a disempowerment program. So, and that's proven by the fact that at age 5, our learning flatlines just as soon as we enter the schools. Just as soon as we're subjected to the trauma of sitting in these classrooms, contrary to our own natures, not learning. So, if the schools aren't there to facilitate the learning of what's in the curriculum, what is it that we really learn? Well, we learn to show up on time. That's useful for you to be a cog in the capitalist system, something we'll talk about in the future, the capitalist system. You learn to obey. You learn to perform busy work. You learn to defer to somebody in charge, even though what they're telling you makes no goddamn sense to you. You learn to put the program before your own wants and needs. Again, we return to the topic of mind over matter, something we learned in potty training. They don't mind and you don't matter. The program comes before you do. You learn to become a slave to others' validation. That's what grades are for. Grades are so that you stop internally thinking about what you think is good or bad, and you defer to someone else's sense of good and bad. You might make something out of clay, and you think, wow, that's the best sculpture I ever made, and you get a C-. You're not going to do that shit again. Somebody else has told you that you're no good at that. And so this deference to others that grades instill in us, that's a very valuable lesson that we take through life. It makes us valuable to be exploited by other people. We submit to the determination of what our place is. Schools do this at a very young age. They subject you to aptitude tests, and they put you on either a high track or a low track, right? And this determines the entire course of the rest of your life. It's interesting because the social sciences have done some tests. This is really, when you think about it, this was this was kind of a crazy thing to do to some little kids. But this is how it went down. You would have a teacher in the classroom, and she would announce that she has to separate the brown-eyed kids from the blue and green-eyed kids, because there was some sort of a study that showed that the blue and green-eyed kids are smarter and better than brown-eyed kids. So she would put the green and blue-eyed kids in the front of the class and put the brown-eyed kids in the back of the class. And the blue and green-eyed kids would have all kinds of preferential treatment, like in the lunchroom and at recess. And what they find when they do this is the blue and green-eyed kids' testing scores skyrocket. And the brown-eyed kids' test scores went straight into the toilet. And it didn't matter if there were brown-eyed kids who were smarter than the blue-eyed kids. Their test scores still went in the toilet. They were convinced they were stupid. So after a short time, the teacher would come back in and say, well, wait a minute, I fucked that up. The test scores, the study actually indicated just the opposite. And so she would make everybody switch seats. And the brown-eyed kids would sit in the front of the classroom, and the blue and green-eyed kids would sit in the back. And you know what would happen? The brown-eyed kids, whose test scores went straight into the toilet once they found out they were stupid, their test scores now soared because they were told they were smart. And the blue and green-eyed kids, who before were geniuses and their test scores soared, now their test scores went straight into the toilet because the teacher told them they were idiots. So when we look at what schools do with these aptitude tests and the different tracks that they put kids into, you know, the smart kid classes and the stupid kid classes, what we're dealing with is really the Pygmalion effect. We're dealing with something that becomes a foregone conclusion because the people who are being told this buy into the definition that's put on them. And so the schools do this. Now the question is why? Well, because the world needs ditch diggers as well as engineers. So if you test on this aptitude test a certain way, here's your shovel. You don't get a clipboard. So schools are there to create this kind of stratification. And think about this. It's instilled in us to achieve. And so if you're not on the top of your heap in school, whatever that heap is, what does that say about your future? You can be a high school kid and you're doing your best, but if you're not at the top of the heap, what does this say about what's going to happen for the rest of your life? I remember my mom telling me when I was in school, these are the best years of your life. And I know she meant well, but I felt anxiety and doom, because if these are the best years of my life, what you're essentially telling me is I should walk across the stage at graduation, grab my diploma, and then blow my own fucking brains out. because if these are the best years of my life, it's all downhill from here. I don't want to live through that. What the fuck? So yeah. Okay. Anyway, getting back to what the topic really is, instead of, my rambling. It takes a year for you to learn the curriculum, right? 1.3 years to learn 10% of what you're going to learn over 13 years. 1 year. But it takes 13 years for the school to pound you into submission and make you something totally fucking useless. It takes 13 years to do that, from age 5 to roughly age 18. And at the same time, it serves as a collective babysitter. That's important to the economic order so that two parents can go to work. That's also one of the ulterior things that school does. It gives you busy work for all that time, so it can hold you in one place, kind of like a prison, while your parents go to work. Now, the other thing, and this is probably the most important thing that schools do in service of the larger order, schools infantilize us. We are infantilized. We are turned into small children when we're not. Now, something to consider here. As mammals, humans are mammals, right? We're primates. We're kind of like chimpanzees with a little less hair on our faces and a little bit bigger cerebral cortex. That's all. So, as mammals, as primates, we reach adulthood at that time in life when we go through puberty. When we grow hair in funny places and we start to hump the furniture, that's when we're adults. Now, in our culture, that's not convenient. We don't look at 13 and 14-year-olds and say, oh, adulthood. We don't do that. We put an artificial threshold at the age of 18. That's when adulthood happens. But let me tell you, from somebody who went through an 18th birthday, there's not a fucking thing that happens on your 18th birthday that makes you any better or more accomplished than you were the day before. I woke up on my 18th birthday. There were no bells ringing. There was no light shining down from heaven on me. The angels were not singing. I remember on my 18th birthday, I made a bowl of cream of wheat and some toast and some instant coffee, and I said, "So this is it, huh? This is adulthood." Now, real adulthood happens to us at age 13 or 14, maybe a little sooner, maybe a little later. It depends on the individual. You grow hair in funny places and you hump the furniture, you're an adult. So in tribal culture, at the age of 13 or 14, you are an adult. Um, you are totally empowered to live as an adult. You go through some sort of I don't know, culture, maybe not, some sort of cultural ceremony, and you get kicked out of your parents' place because your parents hate you and you hate your parents. This is something that's true of any teenager. You hate your parents and your parents hate you. You're in each other's ways, and this friction is there to facilitate the mama bird shoving the baby bird out of the nest. So in tribal culture at age 13 or 14, you go create your own shelter, you find a mate, you build a fire, you know how to make your own clothes, you can participate in the hunting or the foraging, whatever your tribe does to get food, and you're accepted as an adult in your tribe. In our culture, at age 13 or 14, you're fucking useless. You're the same as being 8 or 9 years old. You're infantilized. You're still going through the same process. You're still going to classes. You're still involved in the same program that you started at age 5. Nothing changes for you. So you're infantilized. We're taking young adults at the age of 13 or 14 and we're forcing them to be children. We're forcing them to be dependent. We're forcing them to continue along with the same fucking program. Now, I remember that age being in school and saying, I don't belong here. This is not supposed to be happening to me. It's suffering. It's really painful. And then when you consider what students do to each other, because we internalize all of this shit and we turn on one another, we tribe up amongst ourselves. And the people who are different from us, we look down on. We treat each other really badly. And this happens a lot in school. This happens all the time. It's the water we swim in as fish when we're going to school. This kind of animosity and suffering and competition. So when I look at all of that, just a quick cul-de-sac here, but when I look at all of that, I'm not amazed at the number of school shootings we have. I'm amazed that we have so few. I'm amazed that every single kid isn't going to school with a gun when you consider the amount of suffering they're going through. And so now that we've painted all of this, we have to ask ourselves why? Why is this happening? Why are the schools perpetuating this kind of a program year after year, decade after decade, right? And so here's what I suggest if we want to get to the why. First, let's imagine if this program wasn't happening this way. Let's imagine if 14-year-olds, having engaged in experiential learning, could graduate school after just attending 1 year. And they learn everything that we learn in 13. If they could do this, what would they want? Well, first they'd want freedom. They'd want jobs, money, cars, homes. They'd want power over their own lives. 14-year-olds. And the problem wouldn't be that they're not ready. The problem would be that they would be ready. And whose job do you think they'd want? Yours. Sure, you had to start at the bottom and work your way up, learning the ropes. But this 14-year-old knows the ropes. They've been hanging out for years. They know your job. They know everybody's job. They've been engaged in experiential learning. They only went to 1 year of school. They weren't inhibited by school from learning all the stuff they really needed to know. And they're fit. They're able to work longer hours for less pay. They don't need the medical that you need. And they don't have kids in school needing braces. So that fit, capable 14-year-old could displace you and leave you sleeping in your fucking car. Now, imagine a flood of 14-year-olds to 16-year-olds displacing all the old people. We're talking about an economic coup, a revolution. But it's not just economic, it's social and political. Culture bows to those with the fat wallets, and so does the political system. So we're talking about an absolute generational upheaval as teenagers would be seizing power in every sphere of human activity. We're talking about the economic, social, and political displacement of everybody over the age of 30. And so that's why schools are a disempowerment program. That's why the schools are designed to arrest learning at age 5 and spend 13 years making us stupid and useless. That's why this system infantilizes us and forces us to spend years acting contrary to our own natures, sitting in classrooms not learning so we can be controlled and made dependent and subservient. And so the status quo of the elderly and their power structures won't be disrupted. It's designed that way. So now, from an anarchological point of view, remember anarchology, the study of freedom and the forces that oppose it and how to obtain it. So from an anarchological perspective, this is really important. How we can understand what the schools are actually doing to us. Because more than anything else, the schools are a force that oppose freedom. They stifle our curiosity at age 5. They spend 13 years distorting us into something useful. And that distortion is trauma. This is a continuation of the civilization process, right? That begins at our potty training so that we're not taking a dump in our pants as an adult. That's the beginning of making us something useful. Well, the school system continues that process, making us something useful for a larger system, serving the larger system, not serving us. So trauma is really built in to all of this. this non-freedom system. Now, just to put this into some context, this is the second of what will be 4 episodes that deconstruct those systems and programs that contribute to this larger control system. With next week's episode, Deconstructing Capitalism, and the following episode, Deconstructing the Hierarchy in Government Programs. So once we get those puzzle pieces in place, at least this is my plan moving forward with this. Once we get these puzzle pieces put into place, and we reveal a clear picture of these larger forces that are opposing our freedom and turning us into something useful for exploitation, we can then discuss what freedom is, and we can begin analyzing how these non-freedom forces have impacted us, have imposed trauma on us, and then possibly be able to navigate through that trauma to come out the other end of this with a sense of how we can go about understanding freedom and obtaining it. You know, a healthy approach to confronting those forces arrayed against us so that we can win and get to freedom and happiness. So anyway, that's the plan. And I hope you stay tuned. This is Anarchist Prisoner Sean Swain, and if you're listening, you are the resistance.